Noah Bellini did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Men who could end careers with one phone call, who controlled ports, banks, and things far darker than banks, did not need to shout. When Noah walked into a room, the room adjusted itself. Conversations paused, chairs straightened. Even the air seemed to stand up straighter. Tonight, the room was his own dining hall, and it was doing exactly what every room did around him, going silent. The table stretched 12 feet long, carved from a single tree that had probably been older than the empire his family built on top of it. Candles burned in gold holders. A 3-course dinner sat steaming, untouched, in front of one man. Noah sat at the head of the table, alone, the way he sat every single night. His phone lay face down beside his plate, a rule he'd set for himself years ago, though he could no longer remember why. Maybe it was supposed to look like discipline. Maybe it was supposed to make the emptiness look like a choice. The staff moved along the walls like shadows, trained never to be noticed, trained never to ask questions. Except one of them hadn't learned that yet. Grace Alvarez was 26 years old, 3 days into her new job, and already breaking every unspoken rule of the Bellini household. She was supposed to be dusting the side tables in the hallway. Instead, she stood just past the doorway, staring at the sight in front of her. A man surrounded by wealth most people couldn't imagine, eating dinner completely by himself, night after night, like it was normal. It wasn't normal. It was sad, and Grace had never been good at staying quiet about sad things. "Grace!" The head housekeeper, Marta, hissed her name from behind, tugging at her sleeve. "Don't stare at Mr. Bellini. Get back to work." But Grace had already stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," she said. Every staff member in the room froze. Somewhere near the kitchen door, a tray of wine glasses nearly slipped from someone's hands. Noah didn't look up right away. He was used to being watched, not addressed. His fork paused over a dish he hadn't tasted in 10 minutes. "Yes?" His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that made grown men in expensive suits sweat through their shirts during business meetings. Grace didn't know that yet. She only knew what she saw. A man who owned 6 estates, 3 private jets, and apparently no company at dinner. She should have stopped there. She should have apologized and walked away like Marta was silently begging her to do, with wide, panicked eyes. Instead, she asked the question that would quietly turn his entire world upside down. "When was the last time you stayed somewhere long enough to call it home?" The silence that followed was different from the usual silence in the room. This wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a question landing somewhere it wasn't supposed to reach, somewhere behind the tailored suit and the empire and the reputation that made rival families whisper his name with caution. Marta's face went pale. 2 other staff members exchanged glances that clearly said, "She's getting fired tonight." Noah set down his fork. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, really looked, the way he hadn't looked at anyone who worked in his house in longer than he could remember. She was young, dressed in the plain grey uniform of the cleaning staff, hands still holding a folded cloth like she'd forgotten to put it down. She wasn't trying to charm him. She wasn't trying to get noticed for a promotion or a bonus. She looked, if anything, a little embarrassed by her own boldness, but not sorry. Something about that honesty cut straight through 40 years of walls. "I don't remember," Noah said quietly. 3 words. That was all. But in that house, where every sentence was usually a command or a calculation, those 3 words felt like an earthquake. He looked back down at his plate. The conversation, if it could even be called that, was over. Grace lowered her eyes, finally realizing what she'd done, and slipped back toward the hallway before Marta could drag her there herself. Nobody said another word for the rest of the night. The next morning, the penthouse was a different kind of chaos. Suitcases lined up by the elevator, security team running final checks, assistants speaking in clipped, urgent tones into their phones. Noah was leaving for a 6-week inspection tour across the Bellini family's scattered estates, the coastal property, the old vineyard, the mountain lodge, and more. It was something he did every few years, mostly out of obligation, rarely out of interest. He barely thought about the question from the night before, or told himself he didn't. Marta, still shaken from the previous evening, was certain Grace's short employment at the Bellini residence was about to end before it truly began. She fully expected the girl to be quietly removed from the schedule, perhaps sent to a different family altogether, far from Noah Bellini's sight. Instead, when the final staff assignments were read aloud for the tour, one name near the bottom of the housekeeping travel list made her drop her clipboard. Grace Alvarez, Traveling Staff, Housekeeping Management. Marta stared at the paper twice, certain it was a mistake. Grace herself, standing nearby with a suitcase half-packed, looked equally stunned. Someone must have made the decision. And in a house like this, where every detail was controlled from the very top, there was only one person capable of changing that list overnight. Noah never explained why. He simply stepped into the car that morning, phone in hand, sunglasses on, giving no sign that anything unusual had happened. But somewhere behind that calm, unreadable expression, a single, unfamiliar thought had settled into his mind, one he wasn't ready to admit even to himself. For the first time in years, Noah Bellini was curious about what would happen next. The coastal estate rose out of the cliffs like something from an old postcard. White stone walls, arched windows, a private stretch of beach fenced off from the rest of the world by nothing but distance and money. Grace had seen pictures of places like this in magazines, left behind in waiting rooms. She never imagined she'd be standing in the staff kitchen of one, 3 days into a job that already felt stranger than fiction. The estate was buzzing with activity. In 2 days, Noah would host a gathering of business partners, the kind of quiet, important meeting where deals worth more than entire towns got decided over wine and small talk. The household staff moved fast, publishing silver, pressing lemons, rehearsing schedules down to the minute. Grace was assigned to the guest wing, which meant she rarely crossed paths with Noah directly. Still, every evening, around the same time, she noticed something odd through the hallway windows. He was always on the balcony, alone. Not working, not on his phone, just standing there, staring out at the ocean like it owed him an answer to something. "He does that every trip," one of the older staff members, Rosa, mentioned one evening as they folded towels together. "Comes here for meetings, never actually looks at the sea except from up there. Never walks down to it." "Why not?" Grace asked. Rosa shrugged. "Man like that doesn't have time for sand between his toes." But Grace kept thinking about it. A house with its own private beach, and the owner never touched it. On the 3rd evening, after finishing her tasks early, she found herself walking past the balcony doors just as Noah stepped out, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, staring at the horizon with the same unreadable expression from the dinner she still hadn't stopped thinking about. She should have kept walking. Marta's warnings echoed in her head. Stay invisible. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't repeat what happened at the penthouse. Instead, she found herself standing near the doorway again. "You're doing it again," she said before she could stop herself. Noah turned, mildly surprised to see her there. 3 days on the tour, and this was the first time they'd spoken since that dinner. Doing what? Watching the ocean like it's a business report instead of an ocean? For a second, she thought she'd overstepped. Again. His jaw tightened slightly, the way it probably did right before he ended someone's career in a boardroom. But then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile. Close enough. Is there a better way to watch it? "You could try actually going down there," Grace said, nodding toward the stone steps leading to the private beach below. "Instead of just staring from up here like it's behind glass." Noah looked at the steps, then back at the water, like the idea itself was foreign to him. "I have calls in 20 minutes. "The ocean's been there for a few million years," Grace said. "I think it can wait 20 more minutes without you." She hadn't meant for it to come out so bold, but something about the way he'd said, "I don't remember" 3 nights ago, made her feel like bluntness might actually be the only language that reached him anymore. To her surprise, Noah let out something close to a short laugh, quiet, almost rusty, like a sound he hadn't used in a while. "All right," he said. 20 minutes. They walked down together, an unlikely pair, a billionaire in a half-unbuttoned shirt and a cleaning girl still in her uniform, both equally unsure why this was happening. The sand was cool under Grace's shoes. The waves rolled in slow, steady, endless. For a while, neither of them spoke. Noah walked with his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed somewhere far past the horizon, like he was looking for something he'd lost a long time ago. "When's the last time you did this?" Grace finally asked. "Just walked. No phone, no meeting." Noah was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. Years, maybe." "Years?" "I built this house 6 years ago," he said. "I've been here 4 times. Every time there's a meeting, a call, a deal. I've never actually walked on this beach." Grace looked at him, genuinely surprised. "You built a beach house and never touched the beach?" "When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous." "It is ridiculous," she said, and this time it was Noah who almost laughed again. They kept walking as the sky slowly shifted colors, orange bleeding into pink, pink fading into a deep, quiet blue. Noah stopped walking first, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was dipping low, painting the water gold. "I haven't watched a sunset in years," he said quietly, almost to himself. Grace didn't respond right away. She simply stood beside him, letting the silence hold whatever weight it needed to hold. "Why not?" she finally asked. "Sunsets don't make money," Noah said. It sounded like something he'd told himself so many times it had become armor. But saying it out loud, standing there with the sky burning gold in front of him, it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Neither does laughing," Grace said. "Or walking on a beach, or eating dinner with someone instead of alone. Doesn't mean those things aren't worth something." Noah turned to look at her, something shifting behind his eyes, not quite understanding, not quite agreement, but the beginning of a question he didn't have an answer to yet. His phone buzzed in his pocket. 20 minutes had passed. The call was waiting. He didn't reach for it. For the first time in longer than he could remember, work didn't occupy his entire evening. And somewhere in that quiet, golden moment on the sand, Noah Bellini realized he wasn't in a hurry to end it. The car ride to the vineyard took almost 3 hours, winding through hills that turned greener with every mile. Grace watched the scenery change from the back of the staff van, half listening to Rosa's stories about past trips, half distracted by something she couldn't quite name. Ever since the beach, things had felt different. Noah hadn't said much to her since. A polite nod in the hallway, nothing more, but something in the air between them had shifted. Small, quiet, impossible to explain to anyone else, and definitely impossible to explain to Marta, who had already given Grace 2 separate warnings about getting too comfortable. The vineyard appeared suddenly around a bend, endless rows of grapevines climbing over gentle hills, an old stone house at the center with ivy crawling up its walls. It looked nothing like the coastal mansion or the penthouse. It looked lived in a way the other properties didn't. "This place used to belong to Noah's grandfather," Rosa explained as the van pulled up the gravel driveway. "Before all the Empire stuff. Before Bellini became a name people got nervous saying out loud." Grace looked out the window at the old stone house, trying to imagine Noah Bellini, the man who ate dinner alone in silence, who stared at oceans like they were spreadsheets, as someone's grandson running around vineyards as a child. She didn't have to imagine for long. The moment their cars stopped, an elderly man came hurrying out from the main house, arms already spread wide, face breaking into the kind of smile Grace hadn't seen anyone give Noah since she'd started this job. "Noah! Noah, my boy!" the old man shouted, pulling him into a tight hug before Noah could even step fully out of the car. Grace blinked. My boy. Nobody talked to Noah Bellini like that. Nobody dared. But Noah, the same man who controlled rooms just by entering them, laughed. Actually laughed. Warm and unguarded, hugging the old man back like he was returning to something he'd missed more than he realized. "Salvatore," Noah said, voice softer than Grace had ever heard it. "It's been too long." "Too long, yes. 6 years, Noah. 6 years since you last walked these rows." Grace stood off to the side with the rest of the staff, watching this stranger emerge from beneath the billionaire suit. Someone who used to run through these vines as a boy, who used to know every worker here by name. Over the next 2 days, Grace watched Noah transform in small, quiet ways. He walked the vineyard rows with Salvatore, listening to stories about harvests from decades ago. He sat at long wooden tables with vineyard workers who had known him since he was 5 years old, workers who spoke to him without an ounce of the fear Grace saw in his usual staff back home. "You remember when you fell into the wine barrels trying to steal grapes?" One of the older workers, a woman named Elena, said one afternoon, laughing so hard she nearly dropped her tray. "I was 7, Noah said, half embarrassed, half laughing along. "You cried for an hour. Your grandfather had to fish you out himself." Grace, standing nearby refilling water glasses, couldn't hold back her own smile. This version of Noah, laughing, a little red-faced, teased mercilessly by people who clearly adored him, felt like a completely different person from the man who sat alone at the head of a 12-foot table back at the penthouse. That evening, she found him standing alone at the edge of the vineyard, watching the sun set behind the endless rows of vines, the same way he'd watched it at the beach. "You seem happy here," she said, walking up beside him. Noah didn't turn immediately. "I used to spend every summer here, before my father took over the business, before everything became about numbers and expansion." "What happened?" "My father died young. I inherited everything before I was ready. The company, the estates, the responsibilities." He paused. "I never came back here after that, too busy trying to prove I deserved what I'd been given." "Did you? Prove it?" Noah finally looked at her, something raw flickering behind his eyes. "I don't know anymore." Grace thought about Salvatore's face when he saw Noah step out of that car, the way his eyes lit up like he was seeing family, not a company owner arriving for a business inspection. "They don't see a boss here," she said quietly. "They see you, the real you, whoever that is underneath all the meetings and money." Noah was quiet for a long moment, then, almost to himself, "I forgot what that felt like." The next morning, before they left, Noah called a private meeting with his estate advisors, the same advisors who had been pushing for over a year to sell the vineyard to a development company planning to turn the land into luxury resort villas. Grace wasn't in the room, but she heard about it within the hour, the way news always traveled fast among staff. Noah had refused the sale. Not just refused, he'd instructed his team to draft new agreements ensuring the vineyard and every worker on it would remain under Bellini family protection for as long as the family existed. Salvatore, when he heard the news, had to sit down for a moment, visibly overwhelmed. "Your grandfather would be proud," he told Noah, voice thick. "He'd be proud of you," Noah said. "All of you. This place raised me more than any boardroom ever did." As they packed up to leave for the city, Grace caught Noah glancing back at the vineyard one last time, not with the tired, distant expression he usually wore, but something closer to peace. Something had shifted in him here. Grace didn't know exactly what it meant yet, or where this strange, unexpected journey was leading either of them. But she knew, without a doubt, that the man getting into the car beside her was not the same man who had sat alone at that 12-foot table just 1 week ago. The Grand Hotel ballroom looked like something built for royalty. Crystal chandeliers dripping light across marble floors, a string quartet playing softly near the entrance, waiters gliding between tables balancing trays of champagne. Tonight's event was a charity gala raising funds for scholarships and community housing projects, one of the few public appearances Noah made every year. Grace wasn't anywhere near the ballroom floor. She was 3 levels down in the cramped, fluorescent-lit staff quarters, helping coordinate linens and table settings with the rest of the housekeeping team assigned to support the event. It was strange, she thought, how one building could hold 2 completely different worlds, the glittering one upstairs and the tired, hard-working one below it. "Focus, Grace," Marta said, handing her a stack of folded napkins. "Big night. No mistakes." Grace nodded, though her mind kept drifting upstairs, wondering how Noah was handling a room full of powerful people who all wanted something from him. She got her answer sooner than expected. Around 9, rumors trickled down through the staff grapevine. Noah had given a short speech about expanding scholarship funding, more generous than in previous years, catching even his own board off guard. Then, oddly, he'd left the main floor early, disappearing from the event without explanation right as the formal dinner began. Nobody knew where he'd gone. Grace found out an hour later, during her own dinner break in the staff cafeteria, a plain, quiet room with metal tables and vending machines, worlds away from the ballroom above. She was halfway through a simple plate of pasta when the door opened and every head in the room turned at once. Noah Bellini, still in his tailored tuxedo, stood in the doorway of the staff cafeteria like he wasn't entirely sure he was in the right place. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence Grace was starting to recognize as his particular effect on any space he entered. "Sir," one of the kitchen staff stammered, immediately standing. "Do you need something? I can have someone bring—" "No," Noah said. "I just wanted to eat somewhere quiet." His eyes moved across the room and landed on Grace, sitting alone at a corner table. Something unspoken passed between them. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Grace blinked. Every staff member in the cafeteria was staring now, mouths slightly open, watching their billionaire employer casually gesture toward the seat across from a cleaning girl, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "It's a free country," Grace said, recovering her voice. "Or so I've heard." Noah almost smiled as he sat down across from her, loosening his bow tie, looking more relaxed in that plastic cafeteria chair than Grace had ever seen him look upstairs in any of his mansions. Word spread through the building faster than the champagne upstairs. By the time dessert was being served in the ballroom, half the household staff already knew that Noah Bellini had skipped his own scholarship gala to eat pasta in the staff cafeteria with the new cleaning girl. "Are you going to tell me why you left your own party?" Grace asked, twirling pasta onto her fork. "Too many people wanting something from me," Noah said. "Donations, deals, introductions to their daughters." He said the last part dryly, and Grace nearly choked on her food, trying not to laugh. "Sounds exhausting." "It is." He glanced at her plate, then at his own untouched tuxedo jacket. "This is better." "Pasta from a cafeteria versus a 5-course dinner upstairs?" "The company," Noah said simply, "not the menu." Grace felt something warm rise in her chest that she quickly tried to ignore. This was dangerous territory. A housekeeping employee sitting across from her billionaire boss, sharing food like old friends. Every instinct told her to keep things professional, polite, distant. But every time she looked at him, she saw less of the untouchable Bellini name and more of the tired, lonely man from that first dinner. The one who'd said, "I don't remember," like it hurt to admit. "People are staring," she said quietly, nodding toward the rest of the cafeteria, where staff members were very obviously pretending not to watch. "Let them stare," Noah said. "For the first time in years, I'm actually enjoying dinner. I'm not going to rush that because people are nervous." By the next morning, the rumor had already spread through the entire traveling staff, some version of the story growing more dramatic with every retelling. Marta pulled Grace aside before breakfast, her expression tight with worry. "Do you understand what you're doing?" Marta asked. Men like Noah Bellini don't sit with staff for fun, Grace. People are already talking. This could end badly for you. I didn't ask him to sit down, Grace said honestly. He walked in on his own. That's not the point, Marta said. The point is, people upstairs are noticing. And when powerful families notice things, it's rarely without consequences. Grace didn't have an answer for that. She wasn't sure what was happening between her and Noah, if anything was happening at all, but she couldn't deny the quiet, growing feeling that something had shifted the moment he sat down across from her in that plain, forgotten cafeteria, choosing her company over an entire ballroom of people who wanted his money, his name, his attention. For the first time, someone wanted none of those things from him. They just wanted him. The road to the mountain lodge twisted higher and higher until the trees turned from green to gold, and the air outside the car windows grew thin and cold. Grace watched the clouds thicken over the peaks ahead, gray and heavy, rolling in faster than anyone expected. "Storm's coming," the driver muttered, glancing at the sky. "Hope we make it before it hits." They didn't. Halfway up the final stretch of road, the rain came down in sheets, turning the narrow mountain path into a blur of water and fog. By the time the convoy pulled into the lodge's covered entrance, everyone was soaked despite the short dash from car to door, and the storm outside had only grown worse. The Bellini Mountain Lodge was smaller than the other estates, a warm, wood-paneled building with a massive stone fireplace at its center, more cozy hunting cabin than billionaire mansion. Within an hour, word came through the radio that the mountain roads had flooded in 3 places. Nobody was leaving tonight. Nobody was even leaving in the morning, most likely. For the household staff, this meant an unexpected night off from the usual rigid schedule. For Noah, it meant something far more unfamiliar. An entire evening with no meetings, no calls, no internet connection strong enough to handle a video conference. "Sir, I can try the satellite phone if there's anything urgent," his assistant offered nervously, clearly expecting frustration. Noah looked out at the storm hammering against the windows, then back at the phone in his assistant's hand. "Leave it," he said. "There's nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." His assistant blinked, clearly stunned, but said nothing more. By evening, the staff had gathered in the lodge's main living room, building a fire, pulling out an old wooden box of board games that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Someone found a stack of dusty vinyl records. Someone else discovered a bottle of wine meant for the formal dinner that was never going to happen now, given the circumstances. Grace found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor with the rest of the estate employees, teaching a card game she remembered from childhood, while rain lashed against the windows outside. Noah stood near the doorway for a long moment, watching the scene like it belonged to someone else's life. Laughter, easy conversation, people relaxed in a way none of his employees usually dared to be around him. "You can sit, you know," Grace called out, catching him staring. "The floor doesn't bite." A few of the staff members exchanged nervous glances, unsure how their employer would react to being addressed so casually. But Noah, after a brief pause, actually walked over and lowered himself onto the rug beside them. "All right," he said. "Teach me this game." What followed was, without exaggeration, the strangest and most unexpected 2 hours several staff members had ever experienced. Noah Bellini, feared across 3 industries, known for ending business deals with a single sentence, lost spectacularly at cards, twice, groaning dramatically each time while his housekeeping staff laughed harder than they'd ever dared laugh in his presence. Grace's cheerful energy seemed to spread through the entire room like warmth from the fireplace. By the second hour, even the most nervous staff members had relaxed, joking freely, teasing Noah about his terrible card strategy without a hint of fear. "You're doing this on purpose," Noah accused Grace after losing a 3rd round. "You're cheating somehow." "I'm simply better than you," Grace said, grinning. "It happens to the best of us, sir." "Don't call me sir tonight," Noah said quietly, and something in his tone made the room pause for just a moment before laughter picked back up again. Later, once most of the staff had drifted off to their rooms and the fire had burned low, Grace found Noah still sitting near the hearth, alone, staring into the flames the same quiet way he'd stared at the ocean and the vineyard sunset. She sat down beside him without asking, close enough to feel the warmth of the fire between them. "Tonight was fun," she said, "wasn't it?" Noah nodded slowly. "I can't remember the last time I laughed like that. Actually laughed, not the polite kind you do at business dinners." "When was it?" He was quiet for a long moment, the fire crackling softly between them.
"I don't even know what I enjoy outside of work anymore," he admitted finally, voice low, almost embarrassed by the confession. "I used to play guitar. I used to read for fun, not just industry reports. I don't know when I stopped. It just happened, slowly, until one day there was nothing left except meetings and empty dinners." Grace watched the firelight flicker across his face, seeing not the untouchable billionaire, not the feared name whispered in boardrooms, but simply a man who had lost pieces of himself somewhere along the way and hadn't noticed until now. "Maybe it's time to find them again," she said softly. "The things you used to enjoy. Nobody says you have to figure it all out tonight. But maybe start somewhere small. A guitar, a book, a card game with people who aren't afraid to beat you." Noah looked at her, something warm and unguarded in his expression that hadn't been there when this journey began. "Maybe I already found one small thing." Grace felt her heart skip, though she quickly told herself not to read too much into it. Outside, the storm raged on, trapping them together in the warm, firelit lodge. But for the first time in longer than either of them could admit, neither one of them minded being stuck. The Bellini country manor sat at the heart of rolling green land that had belonged to the family for 4 generations. Unlike the sleek penthouse or the polished coastal estate, this place felt lived in, worn in the comfortable way old furniture gets worn. Soft edges, familiar creaks, portraits of ancestors lining hallways that smelled faintly of firewood and old books. Cars had been arriving all morning. Aunts, uncles, cousins Grace had never heard mentioned before, elderly relatives leaning on canes. The long-planned Bellini family reunion, apparently, only happened once every few years, and this time everyone had been told Noah would actually attend the full weekend, instead of making a brief, distracted appearance before disappearing back to the city. Grace watched from the sidelines as family members embraced Noah one by one. Aunts pinching his cheeks like he was still 12 years old, cousins clapping him on the back, an elderly great-uncle gripping his hand for a long moment, eyes wet. "You look thin," one aunt scolded him immediately. "Are you eating? Sleeping? You work too much, Noah, always too much." "I'm fine, Aunt Teresa," Noah said, though Grace caught the tired smile behind his words. It was clear, within the first hour, that this wasn't a family that feared him the way business partners and rival companies did. Here, he wasn't the untouchable Bellini name. He was just Noah, the boy who used to fall asleep during his grandmother's long stories, the teenager who broke his arm climbing the old oak tree behind the manor, the man his family missed terribly and rarely got to see. The twist came quietly, the way most important things did around Noah. During the afternoon, while most of the family gathered on the lawn for a photograph, Grace overheard 2 of Noah's cousins speaking in low voices near the garden hedge, unaware she was close enough to listen while trimming flowers nearby. "Pushing hard for the vote next board meeting," one of them murmured. "If Noah keeps losing focus like this, skipping calls, refusing the resort deal at the vineyard, giving away money at that gala, Uncle Victor thinks it's grounds enough to challenge his control of the family holdings." "He's still the rightful heir," the other cousin said. "Rightful doesn't matter if the board votes against him, and Victor's been building support for months." Grace's hands went still over the flowers. She hadn't realized until this moment that Noah's newfound peace, the walks on the beach, the vineyard he'd saved,
the quiet dinner in the cafeteria, might be quietly used against him by someone in his own family. She didn't say anything right away. She wasn't sure it was her place.
But the knowledge sat heavy in her chest for the rest of the afternoon, especially when she noticed Victor himself, a sharp-eyed man in an expensive suit, Noah's uncle, watching Noah from across the lawn with an expression that didn't match the warm, welcoming mood of everyone else. That evening, after a long dinner filled with old stories and warm laughter, Noah's younger sister, Isabella, pulled him aside onto the manor's back porch. Grace, clearing plates nearby, caught only pieces of their conversation, but enough to understand its weight. "You've changed these past few weeks," Isabella said softly. "Mama noticed it too. You laughed today. Actually laughed, Noah. Do you know how long it's been since we've seen that?" "I know I've been distant," Noah admitted. "I thought running the company was what everyone needed from me, what Dad would have wanted." Isabella's eyes softened, and what she said next hit Noah harder than anything Grace had witnessed on this entire journey. "We've never wanted your money," Isabella said quietly. "Just your time, Noah. That's all any of us have ever wanted." Noah went very still. Grace, watching from a distance, saw something break gently open in his expression. Years of guilt and grief and pressure finally cracking under the weight of one simple, honest sentence from his sister. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he pulled Isabella into a tight hug, and Grace quietly stepped away to give them privacy, her own eyes stinging unexpectedly. Later that night, Grace found the courage to tell Noah what she'd overheard near the garden. Victor's plan, the board vote, the quiet threat building against him while he'd been busy rediscovering sunsets and family dinners. She expected anger or panic or the cold, calculating expression she imagined he wore in boardrooms. Instead, Noah simply listened, quiet and thoughtful, staring at the fire in the manor's study once she'd finished. "Victor's wanted control for years," he finally said. "I'm not surprised. I'm almost relieved someone's finally showing their hand instead of circling quietly." "Aren't you worried?" Grace asked. "A little," Noah admitted. "But strangely, less than I would have been a month ago." He looked at her, something steady and clear in his eyes, despite the threat now hanging over him. "A month ago, the company was the only thing I had. Losing it would have felt like losing everything. Now—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Grace understood what he meant without needing the words. That night, as the family manor settled into quiet, Noah stayed up long past midnight, not reviewing reports or preparing for battle against his uncle, but sitting with his parents and siblings, listening to old stories, holding on tightly to the very thing Isabella said they'd always wanted from him most: his time. Finally, willingly given. They left the manor 2 days later than planned, delayed by a fallen bridge on the main road that forced the convoy to take a longer route through the countryside. It was Noah's idea, oddly enough, to stop and inspect a small Bellini-owned property nearby, rather than push straight through to the next estate. A decision his assistant found strange, given how tightly the schedule had always been guarded before this trip. "There's no meeting scheduled there," his assistant reminded him, flipping through the itinerary. "It's just an old storage property. Nothing worth inspecting." "Then it won't take long," Noah said simply, and that was the end of the discussion. What none of them expected was the sound of music drifting through the car windows as they approached the small countryside town near the property. Drums, laughter, the smell of roasting corn and fresh bread carrying on the breeze. The town square had transformed into a sea of colorful lanterns and market stalls, packed with locals celebrating what one banner across the street announced as the annual Harvest Festival. "We could go around," the driver offered, noticing Noah leaning forward slightly to look out the window.
"No," Noah said, surprising even himself. "Stop here." Nobody in the crowded square recognized the tall man in a plain jacket, sleeves rolled up, walking beside a young woman in simple clothes. For the first time in longer than either of them could remember, Noah Bellini was just another face in a crowd. No assistants trailing behind, no security scanning the perimeter, no whispers of his name following him from stall to stall. "This is strange," Noah admitted, glancing around at children running past with painted faces, an elderly couple dancing slowly near a small stage where local musicians played fiddles and drums. "Nobody's staring at me." "Get used to it," Grace said, grinning. "Not everyone spends their life recognizing billionaires on sight." They wandered from stall to stall, trying foods Grace insisted he'd never had before. Spiced meat wrapped in flatbread, sweet fried dough dusted with sugar, a strong local drink that made Noah cough after the first sip, while Grace laughed so hard she nearly dropped her own cup. "This is terrible," Noah said, eyes watering. "You're supposed to sip it, not gulp it like water," Grace said, still laughing. "Nobody told me that beforehand." "I'm telling you now." They found a spot near the edge of the square to watch a group of local dancers perform, spinning in bright, layered skirts to music that seemed to pull half the crowd into motion. Noah watched with an expression Grace hadn't seen on him before, not the tired distance from the penthouse dinner, not even the quiet peace from the vineyard sunset, but something closer to simple, unguarded joy. "You're smiling," Grace pointed out. "I noticed," Noah said. And for once, he didn't try to explain it away or attach a reason to it. He just let himself feel it. Later, as the sun dipped low and the lanterns overhead began glowing brighter against the darkening sky, they found themselves walking along the edge of the festival, away from the noise, toward a quiet path lined with old trees strung with warm lights. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Go ahead." "Do you regret it? This trip, all of it, the beach, the vineyard, the family reunion. If none of this had happened, if I'd never asked that question at dinner," she hesitated, "would things be easier for you? Simpler?" Noah considered the question carefully, watching the lanterns sway gently overhead. "Easier, maybe," he admitted. "But easier isn't the same as better. Before this trip, I didn't know I was missing anything. I thought this," he gestured vaguely around them, at the festival, the lights, the whole unexpected detour their journey had taken, "was for other people, not for someone like me. And now? Now I don't know how I convinced myself of that for so long." Grace felt her chest tighten with something warm and terrifying all at once. She'd told herself over and over throughout this trip that whatever was growing between them was simply gratitude, simply the natural closeness that came from sharing unexpected moments together. But standing here, under strings of soft lantern light, watching Noah Bellini look at her like she was the only person in the entire crowded square, she couldn't pretend anymore. "Grace." Noah's voice was quieter now, careful in a way she hadn't heard from him before. "I need to say something, and I don't know how you'll take it." Her heart pounded. "Okay." "This past month has been the first time in years I've felt like myself. Not the Bellini name, not the company, not the responsibility everyone expects me to carry perfectly. Just myself. And every single moment that made me feel that way." He paused, searching for the right words. "You were there for almost all of it." Grace's breath caught. "Noah, I'm not saying this because I expect anything," he continued quickly. "I just needed you to know. Whatever happens after this trip ends, whatever waits for me back home with the board, with Victor, with everything." His voice softened. "I don't want this to be the last time I feel like this." The music from the festival drifted faintly behind them, warm lantern light flickering across both their faces. Grace didn't trust her voice enough to answer right away, but she didn't need to. Standing there, in the quiet space between the noise of the celebration and the weight of everything waiting for them beyond it, neither of them wanted the walk back to end. Their feelings, quietly built over 5 unexpected weeks, had finally become impossible to ignore. The lakeside estate had been closed for nearly a decade. Grace could see it the moment their convoy rounded the final bend. Dust-covered windows, ivy creeping unchecked across the stone walls, a boathouse leaning slightly with age near the still, silver water. Unlike the other properties on this trip, nothing about this place had been maintained for show. It felt forgotten, the way a memory feels when nobody's touched it in years. "This was my mother's favorite place," Noah said quietly, standing at the edge of the gravel drive, staring up at the shuttered windows. "She used to bring us here every summer, before she passed. After that, my father couldn't bear to visit. Neither could I, honestly." Grace said nothing, letting him take his time. This was the final estate on the 6-week tour, the last stop before returning to the city, before returning to whatever waited for Noah with the board vote Victor had been quietly engineering. That threat, at least, had resolved itself 2 days earlier, in a way nobody had expected. The call had come through during their drive from the festival town. Noah's chief legal advisor, voice tight with barely contained shock. Victor's plan to challenge Noah's control at the board meeting had collapsed overnight, not because Noah fought back, but because 3 of Victor's strongest supporters had unexpectedly withdrawn their backing. "They said something changed their minds," the advisor explained, still sounding confused. "One of them mentioned the vineyard decision. Another mentioned the scholarship expansion from the gala. They said—" The advisor paused, checking his notes. "They said the board felt more confidence in your leadership now, not less. Something about seeing you actually present, actually engaged, instead of running the company from behind a wall of meetings." Noah had sat in stunned silence for a long moment after ending that call, and Grace remembered the look on his face, somewhere between disbelief and quiet, humbled gratitude. "Victor was so certain distraction would make me weak," Noah had said finally. "He didn't expect it would be the thing that actually made people trust me more." It was, Grace thought privately, the twist none of them had seen coming. The very moments meant to threaten his position, the walks on the beach, the saved vineyard, the cafeteria dinner, the mountain lodge, the festival, had quietly become the reasons people believed in him again. Standing now at the lakeside estate, Noah walked slowly toward the old boathouse, running his hand along its weathered wood. "The developers wanted to tear this whole place down," he said, "turn it into another luxury resort. I almost approved it last year, before this trip, before all of this." "And now?" Grace asked. Noah turned to look at her, something resolved and clear in his expression. "Now, I think it's time this place became what it was always meant to be. Not another business asset, but somewhere the family actually gathers. Somewhere real."
Over the following days, Noah made calls Grace never expected to hear from him, instructing his team to cancel the resort development entirely, commissioning a careful restoration instead, one that preserved the estate's original character rather than modernizing it beyond recognition. He also announced something that sent quiet shockwaves through his entire executive team. He would be stepping back from the relentless travel schedule that had defined his life for years, delegating far more responsibility to trusted executives, keeping only the decisions that truly required his personal attention. "You're really doing this," Grace said one evening, watching him review restoration plans by lamplight in what would eventually become the estate's new study. "I am," Noah said. "This trip taught me something I should have learned years ago. The company will survive without me hovering over every single decision. But I don't think I'll survive much longer running from home the way I have been." As the tour officially came to its end, Grace found herself quietly packing her things, preparing to return to the city with the rest of the traveling staff. Her temporary assignment on the housekeeping management team had been for this trip only.
She had no reason to believe that would change now that it was over, whatever had grown between her and Noah along the way. She told herself this was simply how things worked. She was staff. He was Noah Bellini. Whatever had happened during these 6 unexpected weeks belonged, perhaps, only to this journey, not to the life waiting for both of them once they returned. She was folding the last of her clothes into her suitcase when Noah appeared in the doorway of the small guest room she'd been staying in, his expression unusually uncertain for a man who normally commanded every room he entered. "Grace," he said, "before you go, I need to ask you something." She turned, heart already pounding. "Yes?" "Stay," he said simply. "Not on the travel team, not as staff." He took a step closer, voice steady despite the vulnerability behind his words. "Stay because I want you beside me. Because these past 6 weeks, you didn't just show me sunsets and vineyards and festivals, you showed me who I could be, if I stopped running long enough to actually live." Grace's suitcase sat forgotten by her feet. "Noah, I'm not sure I'm not asking you to decide everything right now," he said gently. "I'm just asking you not to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if you're willing to see where this goes." Outside the window, the lake caught the last light of evening, calm and endless, exactly the kind of quiet Noah had been searching for without knowing it, all along. Grace looked at the suitcase, then at Noah, standing there with more honesty in his eyes than she'd seen from anyone in a long time. She didn't need much more time to answer. 2 months had passed since the tour ended, and the lakeside estate no longer looked like a forgotten memory. The ivy had been carefully trimmed rather than torn away, the old stone walls restored to their original warmth, the boathouse repaired plank by plank until it stood steady again over the water. What was once a shuttered, dust-covered property now hummed with quiet, constant life, the kind of life Noah had spent years chasing without realizing what it actually looked like. Grace stood on the back porch one evening, watching the sun sink slowly behind the lake, painting the water in the same gold light that had once caught Noah's attention on a beach he'd built but never touched. So much had changed since that evening, and yet, somehow, it all felt like it had been building toward exactly this moment. Family visited nearly every other weekend now. Isabella brought her children to swim in the shallow end of the lake. Salvatore from the vineyard sent crates of wine for every gathering. Even Aunt Teresa had made the trip twice already, declaring the restored manor finally worthy of the Bellini name between mouthfuls of dinner. The staff, too, had become part of this new rhythm of life. What once felt like an invisible wall between employer and employee had softened considerably. During holidays, the household staff were welcomed at the long dining table rather than serving quietly along its edges, a small change that still made Marta shake her head in disbelief every time it happened, though she'd long stopped protesting it. Noah rarely traveled anymore. The relentless inspection tours, the endless meetings that used to swallow his evenings whole, had been carefully redistributed among trusted executives, exactly as he'd promised at the lakeside estate 2 months earlier. He still worked, still made the decisions that mattered most, but the empty, hollow nights of eating dinner alone at a 12-foot table had become nothing more than a distant memory. Grace heard the screen door creak open behind her and felt Noah's presence settle beside her on the porch, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "You're thinking again," he said, handing her 1 glass. "I can always tell." "Just remembering," Grace said, accepting the wine. "It's strange, thinking about how all of this started. 1 question at a dinner table. I almost didn't ask it, you know. Marta looked like she wanted to drag me out of the room before I even finished the sentence." Noah smiled, settling into the chair beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I'm glad you didn't listen to her." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that no longer felt heavy or lonely, but full of laughter drifting faintly from inside the house, where a few of the staff were helping Isabella's children with a puzzle by the fireplace, full of the soft sound of water lapping gently against the restored boathouse dock. Do you ever think about what would have happened? Grace finally asked. If Victor's plan had actually succeeded? If the board had voted against you? Noah considered the question, swirling the wine in his glass. I used to think losing the company would be the worst thing that could happen to me. Now I think the worst thing would have been keeping it and losing everything else in the process. You, my family, whatever this is that I finally found again. He paused. Funny, isn't it? The very things Victor thought made me weak ended up being the reason the board trusts me more than they ever did before. Life has a strange sense of humor sometimes, Grace agreed. It does. Noah reached over, taking her hand gently in his. Especially when it decides to send someone blunt enough to ask a housekeeper's cleaning question a rich man never wanted to answer. Grace laughed softly, leaning her head against his shoulder as the last light of the sun disappeared behind the lake, giving way to the soft, warm glow of the lanterns strung along the porch, not unlike the ones from the festival all those weeks ago, where they'd first admitted what neither of them could ignore any longer. So, Grace said quietly, watching the lake settle into darkness, the house behind them glowing with warmth and laughter, and the comfortable noise of people who belonged there. Have you finally found home? Noah was quiet for a moment, looking out at the water, at the restored boathouse, at the family and staff gathered inside the house that used to sit empty and forgotten for a decade. Then he turned to look at her, something steady and certain in his eyes, the same steadiness she'd first glimpsed cracking open that night at the coastal estate, watching a sunset he hadn't allowed himself to see in years.
He took her hand, gently, like it was the only anchor he'd ever truly needed. It was never a place, he said softly. It was the person who showed me the way home. Grace felt her heart swell, tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes as she leaned into him, watching the lights of the lakeside estate flicker warmly against the darkening sky. The road that once carried Noah Bellini from one empty property to another, from silent dinners to distant boardrooms, from one forgotten estate to the next, had finally, quietly, led him somewhere he never expected to find. Not to another mansion, not to another deal, but home and love. Exactly where he had been searching, without ever realizing it, all along.